Hi, sixth graders. So at this point, you should have your data table completely filled out from your experiment with dropping the ball. I am going to suggest that you take a minute, and you might need to pause the video to do this, but I'm going to suggest that you find the mean or the average bounce time at 100 centimeters and at 50 centimeters. When you're kind of going to be explaining your data in the next couple questions, it's going to be helpful for you to just have the average bounce time instead of having to say all three different trials. So I would pause and go ahead and do that, and then resume the video, okay? All right. I just wanted to kind of, because this was your first experiment, I thought it might be useful for you to compare your data to mine, just to make sure you're on the right track, just to kind of see that you're kind of finding similar things that I am. So let's just take a look at my data for just 1 second. So when I dropped with the ball from 100 centimeters, I got 4.53 seconds, 3.99, and 4.06. I added those three up, divided by 3, to get an average of 4.19 seconds. From 50 centimeters, the ball bounced 2.93, 3.07, and 3.02. So I added those up and divided by 3. And so I got an average bounce time of 3.01 seconds. So for my experiment, the higher drop height did have a longer bounce time. Okay, just so you could kind of see as you're going through here. And you can see if you found a similar thing, or if your data had a different result. But my guess is that you found something similar to mine. Okay, so you've got your data, I've got my data. Let's take a look at what these questions are. And I've given you some sentence stems here to try to help you. And so number 6 says, write what you found out. Use the terms potential and kinetic energy in your response. So this is almost like I've turned this into a little bit of a fill in the blank on this question. It really wants you to tell what you found, give some data, and then use these words potential and kinetic. So the parts where I've highlighted is kind of like where you would fill in the blank with your data or your conclusion. So I said the potential energy of the ball from the greater drop height produced a longer bounce, a shorter bounce, or an equal bounce. So you would, based on your data, kind of answer that question. And for mine, the higher bounce time the higher drop height had a longer bounce time. So I would write that word longer. You look at your data and see what yours would say. Then you would say the ball bounced an average of, and this is 4.19 for me, 4.19 seconds from the 100 centimeters height, and it bounced an average of 3.01 seconds from the 50 centimeter height. So you are telling your data, and you notice we're using complete sentences, we're using the numbers, we're using our units, we're telling from which height, and again, we're using those numbers. So we're giving a very scientific answer, a very complete answer. The last thing we need to do is kind of connect this back also to kinetic energy. So I said the distance between the ball and the ground, and you have a choice, does or does not affect the amount of potential and kinetic energy. So did changing it make it bounce longer? Did raising it up bounce longer? Did decreasing that height above make it bounce shorter? If it did, then yes, it does affect the amount of potential and kinetic energy. If your ball bounced the exact same, no matter what height you dropped it at, then you would say it did not affect it. It was the same every height. So look at your data and see which way you think it goes. My data, it did affect the amount of potential and kinetic energy. A higher drop gave me a longer bounce time, is what my data proved. So look at yours and see what your data proves. Number 7, this question, which is right up under here, says, list any further questions that developed during your investigation. So if you were going to extend this experiment, what else would you like to investigate? So think about what else you could test. We had this ping pong ball. Do you think other balls will get a similar result? So could you test this with different kinds of balls? Sure. What about different heights? So we only tested at 100 and at 50. What if you had 200 or 25 or 150? Do you think that what do you think would happen there? What about different surfaces that we talked about how carpet probably wouldn't be the best surface for this experiment, but I used wood floor. Do you think tile would change that? Do you think a sidewalk would change that? Like, what other questions, if you were going to continue and deepen this investigation, what else could you explore? What would you be interested in finding out? And so that's just some ideas to extend this. All right. And then let's look at the last part. And if you needed to pause this to write this down, that's totally fine. I'm just going to keep going so the video is not hugely long. So this last question is really where you are stating all of your findings kind of officially. So this question says, write a scientific statement or conclusion to your investigation. Include a claim, evidence, and reasoning. So you have a claim, evidence, and reasoning. And I've tried to give you some tips for each of these parts. And my picture is kind of in the way, so I want to scoot it over. So your claim is really, what did you prove? So you might start out, the greater the distance the object is above the ground, what happens? Like you got to finish that sentence, right? So the greater it is above the ground, what did your data and experiment prove? And so you need to show what you proved. Evidence is like, give us the data again. And we stated it already once, but you're going to state it again. So tell your data, use your numbers, use your units, give the data. And then the reasoning part is really where you get to explain the science, okay? So I would say potential energy is, give a definition. The ping pong ball had potential energy when, so show that you know that. What is kinetic energy? So kinetic energy is, give a definition. The ball had kinetic energy when, you can explain that. This lab shows. And then I would end again with what you proved. So you're explaining that you know the science of what was happening in this experiment with potential and kinetic energy, and you are going to show what your lab proved. Okay, so again, you're welcome to pause this video, kind of use these questions, and then you should have most of this whole thing kind of here filled out with a good claim, evidence, and reasoning. Okay, so once you finish writing up that lab report and kind of showing your findings and your conclusion, you are going to submit this. You are going to take pictures of the 3 pages of your lab report, and you're going to submit those photos. So I did not give you options for a video, and I did not give you options like a text box or something that would make sense. You need to make sure your pictures of your pages show everything that I need to grade. So notice here on the document camera, you can see the claim, the evidence, and the reasoning, and you see how clear it is to read. Look at your pictures before you send them. Please make sure they are readable. And I know you don't have a document camera, so you have to hold yours up. But when you're holding it up, make sure, it's hard to always do that you're holding it. So if you look at that little tiny camera, you can see it kind of cuts off the bottom a little bit. I might need to take a picture there and then raise it up and take a picture there. So you're welcome to have more than one picture of a page if you need to get the top and the bottom. So just make sure you're sending me the things that I need to be able to read what you wrote. Okay, it needs to be readable, and I need to see all of it. All right, thanks a lot. You can let me know if you have questions.